The look on my son Marcus's face when the bank manager slid that folder across the mahogany table. I wish I could have bottled that expression and aged it like a fine scotch. After 6 months of telling me I was obsolete and out of touch, he finally realized that being the boss involves a lot more than just sitting in the big chair and ordering expensive lunches. He looked at the $2.2 million figure highlighted in yellow, then looked at me, his jaw working but no sound coming out. He'd spent 20 years taking my hard work for granted, but he never once considered that I might have a safety net of my own. To understand how we got to that boardroom, and how my own flesh and blood tried to discard me like a piece of broken machinery, I have to take you back to the beginning. I started Sterling Logistics in 1994 with a single rusted-out Freightliner and a mortgage I couldn't really afford. Back then, my wife, Martha, handled the books on the kitchen table while I pulled double shifts, driving through ice storms in the Midwest just to make sure we could pay the heating bill. I remember the smell of diesel and stale coffee being a permanent part of my skin. I did it for the family. I wanted Marcus and his sister Elena to have the life I never had, the private schools, the summer camps, the freedom to choose any career they wanted. I built a legacy out of nothing but grit and late nights. By the time I hit 60, Sterling Logistics had 65 trucks, a 40,000 square foot warehouse in northern New Jersey, and a reputation for reliability that was worth more than the assets on the balance sheet. The first crock in the foundation appeared about 3 years ago. Marcus had come home from getting his MBA with a lot of ideas about optimization and disruptive scaling. I welcomed him into the company with open arms, thinking he'd be the one to carry the torch. Elena joined shortly after as our head of marketing. I was proud. I thought I'd achieved the American dream, a thriving business run by my own children. But the pride didn't last long. It started with small things. Marcus would sign off on equipment leases without checking with me. Elena started a brand refresh that cost 6 figures and involved changing our classic logo to some minimalist squiggle that none of our long-term clients recognized. When I questioned the expense, they didn't offer explanations. They offered condescension. That should have been my wake-up call, but I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that they were just eager to prove themselves. I was wrong. It wasn't a phase. It was a takeover. The disrespect didn't stay in the office. It bled into our Sundays. At dinner, my son-in-law Greg, a man who's never had a drop of grease under his fingernails in his life, would make snide comments about my old-school methods. He'd sit at my table, eating the steak I paid for, and talk about how the logistics industry was moving past dinosaurs like me. Marcus would chuckle, and Elena would just nod, scrolling through her phone. They started talking about me as if I wasn't in the room. They discussed transitioning me to a chairman emeritus role, which is just a polite way of saying, go sit in a park and feed the birds. If that was all, I probably would have let it go. I'm a patient man. I've waited out blizzards on the I-80. I know how to sit tight. But then came the warehouse expansion. Marcus and Elena were convinced we needed to pivot into high-tech cold storage. It was a massive investment, over $2 million. I told them the timing was wrong, that the interest rates were climbing and our debt-to-equity ratio was already stretched from their refresh projects. Marcus actually rolled his eyes at me. He told me I was thinking small and that I was scared of the future. And that's when I realized they didn't see me as their father anymore. They didn't even see me as the founder. They saw me as a bank account and an obstacle.
The final straw happened 3 months ago. I arrived at the office on a Tuesday morning to find a group of consultants sitting in my conference room. Marcus and Elena had called a special board meeting. Years ago, as part of my estate planning, I'd gifted them each 26% of the company's shares, keeping 48% for myself. I thought it was a way to ensure they felt invested in the family legacy. I never thought they'd use it as a weapon. They voted together, 52% against 48%. They voted to remove me as CEO and president, effective immediately. "It's time for a fresh perspective, Dad," Elena said, not even looking me in the eye. "The brand needs to be refreshed for the digital age, and your traditionalist approach is holding us back." Marcus didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just leaned back in my chair, the one I'd sat in for 30 years, and told me that my severance package would be generous and that I should take this opportunity to finally enjoy my retirement. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a fit. I just took my coat, picked up the framed photo of Martha from my desk, and walked out. Something in me shifted that day. I didn't say a word as I walked to my car, but I started making calls before I'd even pulled out of the parking lot. They thought they were playing chess, but they didn't even realize I owned the board. I spent the next 2 months getting everything in order. I'm a methodical man. You don't run a logistics company for 3 decades without learning how to track every moving part. I knew something Marcus and Elena had completely overlooked in their arrogance. See, when they pushed through that $2.2 million loan for the cold storage expansion, they were so caught up in the vision that they didn't pay attention to the fine print. They were the officers of the company, but they had no personal credit to speak of. Marcus had a mountain of debt from his lifestyle choices, and Elena's husband had spent most of their savings on failed tech startups. The bank, my bank, where I'd done business for 30 years, hadn't approved that loan based on Sterling Logistics' balance sheet alone. They'd approved it because I had personally guaranteed it. And there was a very specific clause in that guarantee, the key man provision. If I was no longer in a position of operational control, the bank had the right to call the loan due in full within 90 days if the company's performance metrics dipped. And oh boy, were they dipping. Marcus had spent the first month of his tenure firing my most experienced dispatchers because they were too expensive and replacing them with an automated software system that didn't understand how New Jersey traffic worked. We lost 3 of our biggest contracts in 6 weeks. The company was hemorrhaging cash. I waited. I watched. I played the part of the retired old man. I went fishing. I worked on my garden. When Marcus called me to complain about unexpected headwinds, I just told him, "That's the business, son. I'm sure you've got it under control." I could hear the panic in his voice, but I didn't offer a lifeline. You want to be the captain? You stay on the bridge when the ship starts taking on water. The reckoning came on a rainy Thursday in November. I'd invited Marcus, Elena, and their VP of strategy, Greg, to a meeting at the bank. They thought I was coming there to sign over more of my personal assets to help them cover the shortfall. They arrived looking harried and stressed, Marcus's expensive suit wrinkled, Elena looking like she hadn't slept in a week. They still tried to maintain the act, though. "Thanks for coming, Dad," Marcus said, trying to sound authoritative as we sat down in the private conference room of Mr. Henderson, the bank manager. "We've had a few bumps, but this new injection of capital will really turn things around." I just smiled and nodded. Let's see what Arthur has to say.
Arthur Henderson didn't smile. He opened a thick blue folder and laid it on the table. "Marcus, Elena, I've been reviewing Sterling Logistics' performance over the last quarter. The loss of the Miller-Hollage contract and the Amazon regional subcontract has put you in violation of your debt-to-income covenants." Marcus scoffed. "It's a temporary dip. We're refreshing our client base." "Be that as it may," Arthur continued, his voice as cold as a January morning in a loading dock. "The $2.2 million expansion loan was contingent on your father's personal guarantee. That guarantee was predicated on his role as CEO. When you voted him out, you triggered a risk reassessment clause. Without his personal assets backing this debt, the bank no longer considers this a viable loan." The color started to drain from Elena's face. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, speaking for the first time, my voice calm and steady, "that the bank is calling the loan, due in full, by the end of business today." The silence in that room was heavy enough to crush a man. Greg was the first to find his voice. "You can't do that. We have assets, the trucks, the warehouse." "The trucks are leased," I reminded him gently, "and the warehouse has a secondary mortgage that Marcus took out last month to cover payroll. There is no equity left, Greg. You've spent it all on rebranding and consultants." Marcus looked at me, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and betrayal. "Dad, you're the guarantor. If the bank calls the loan, you have to pay it. You'll lose everything too." I leaned back and took a slow sip of my coffee. "That's where you're wrong, Marcus. I've already paid it." The jaw drop was universal. "I bought the debt from the bank 3 days ago," I explained. "I created a new holding company, Sterling Senior Holdings. I used my personal savings, the money I'd set aside for my generous retirement, to buy the note from Arthur here. So the bank is out of the picture. I am now your sole creditor." So we just owe you the money instead?" Elena stammered, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "We're family." "Family," I repeated the word as if I were tasting something bitter. Funny how that word only comes up when you need something. When you were voting me out of my own office, I don't recall family being part of the discussion. When Greg was calling me a dinosaur at my own dinner table, family didn't seem to matter much then either. I pulled a second set of documents from my briefcase.
As the holder of the note and given the company's current insolvency, I am exercising my right to seize the collateral. Since the company can't pay the $2.2 million, I'm taking the business back, all of it. The name, the contracts, the remaining equipment. As of 10 minutes ago, Sterling Logistics is a subsidiary of my new holding company. You're firing us? Whispered Marcus. No, I said. You don't work for me. You never really did. You worked for your own egos. I'm simply dissolving your positions. The refresh is over. I'm going back to the old logo, and I'm bringing back the dispatchers you fired. They've already agreed to come back, provided you two aren't in the building. Greg stood up, his face flushed with anger. This is illegal. You're sabotaging your own children. We'll sue. On what grounds, Greg? I asked, not even looking at him. Everything was done by the book. The same book Marcus used to vote me out. I followed the bylaws to the letter. If you want to spend the next 5 years in court, be my guest. But remember, you're currently unemployed and your personal accounts are nearly empty. I, on the other hand, have a very good lawyer.
The realization finally hit them. It was a slow-motion collapse. Elena started to cry, not out of sadness, I suspect, but out of the sheer terror of having to live on a budget. Marcus just sat there, staring at the table, finally understanding that his MBA hadn't taught him anything about real-world loyalty or the weight of a man's word. I stood up and buttoned my coat. I'll have your personal belongings sent to your homes by the end of the week. Don't come by the office. There's a security guard at the gate with a list of people who aren't allowed on the property. Your names are at the top. I walked out of that bank and felt the first breath of fresh air I'd had in years. It wasn't about the money. I'd have given them every penny if they'd just shown me an ounce of respect. It was about the dignity of the work. My life is a lot quieter now. I'm back at the helm of Sterling, but I'm training a young man named David, one of my old drivers who actually knows the difference between a manifold and a muffler. Marcus and Elena, well, they had to sell their houses. Marcus is working as a middle manager for a rival firm, and Elena is doing freelance consulting. They call me every Sunday now. They're very polite. They ask about my health and tell me how much they miss our family dinners. I haven't invited them back yet. Maybe one day I will. But for now, I'm enjoying the silence. It's amazing how much more you can hear when people stop talking down to you. My business is thriving. My trucks are on the road. And for the first time in a long time, the name on the door actually means something again.